G'day gymnastics skill seekers, and welcome back to another training vlog. I'm just about to start week 5 of my current training phase. So these videos were taken as part of week 4's training. This is my third session of the week and it's combining gymnastics flexibility and gymnastics strength, with the goals here being working on my pancake flexibility and also we're doing an eccentric hollow back press on the P-bars, so kicking up to handstand, opening the legs into sort of a straddle, and then lowering down through the handstand push-up, and then moving into the bent arm planche. We're also working on backwards rolls here, but the backwards roll progression that I'm up to is just working on the kip out of the backwards roll and coming to stand. So not actually kipping up and catching in ring support, but right now just getting the practice in of extending the hips, creating that force to kick me up and over the rings and just come back to a standing position right now. I'm also just working on some muscle up conditioning. So it's wide grip, muscle up transitions, just reps of that. So let's get stuck in. All right, week 4 of the current block and getting ready to do a session, but weather's not on my side, it's raining. Usually like to use the outdoor pull-up bar, but today not going to be an option because when the rings get wet, they're no fun at all. So I've had to bring the pull-up bar undercover. So let's see how that goes today. Okay, so I'm starting the session today with the eagle hang. Now I've had a lot of people ask me about this because it's in all of my sessions right now. And what's the point of it? So you'll see that I place the pinky fingers on the inside edge of the hand, and this forces the shoulders into internal rotation in this hang. Now, if you're missing length in the external rotators, if you've got short and tight external rotators, you're going to find this a hard position to get into. So you might try like a half eagle hang where you only put one arm into that internally rotated position and then the other arm you just hold as like a normal pull-up grip. And we just hang out here, and I find moving into the tuck position helps because when I move into tuck, what that's going to do is it's going to set a posterior pelvic tilt, which is going to help to lengthen the lats. So I start to feel a stretch in the lats, but you'll also start to feel a stretch through tightness in pecs potentially and down through the serratus. So it's just a good exercise to help open up the shoulders and prepare them for the session to come. So I'm holding the eagle hang for 20 to 30 seconds, and then I'm moving into just a simple doorway pec stretch here. After doing that, I'm going to move into my leg swings, my weighted leg swings. Now, before I do that, I also like to stretch out the hamstrings a little bit. To keep it simple, I'm already using the Reebok step for my leg swings. So let's just do a squat to pike, moving from a bent knee position where I'm closing the angle between the torso and the thighs to a straight leg position where I'm trying to obviously maintain that closed angle. Is a great way to stretch out the hamstrings. It's going to activate a little bit of the core muscles in terms of core compression here. It's just a simple drill that I like to do and just stretch out the hamstrings before I go into the leg lifts. Obviously, having a little bit more mobility in the hamstrings in the posterior chain is going to help increase the core compression strength in the anterior chain. Leg swings are a part of every session. It's just a great way to activate abdominals and activate the hip flexors and prepare for the session. My main focus here is trying to keep the standing leg straight. We often want to bend the knee, and this allows us to cheat the movement a little bit. So focus here is, can I keep the standing leg straight and work through my front scales, side scales, and back scales with those leg swings. From here, I'm moving into the main part of my gymnastic flexibility training today, and the focus is trying to improve my pancake flexibility. I've got my trusty gym partner, Sky, here to help me through this part of the session. So the first thing I'm working on today is sitting in that pigeon position and working on some hip hinges to try and improve the hip external rotation, a little bit of work on the hip capsule, and you can see how this is going to help me to forward hinge in the pancake. We need to have length in the glutes, and I think after years of deadlifts and squats and building strength in the gym, my glutes have definitely been an area that's been quite tight. So I sit on the yoga block and use a yoga block under the knee just because I don't have the mobility to sit on the floor just yet. So slightly elevated allows me to hold the pigeon position. I'm placing the hands behind my head and just working on trying to maintain a flat back and hinging forward and down. I'm extending that back leg and internally rotating that rear hip, helping to keep the hip square. And I'm trying to keep the rear knee off the ground. So I'm not using the leg to assist the sit up in or the concentric part of the hip hinge. I'm trying to use the glute glute or isolate more of the glute in that sort of good morning position as I move up and down. I can play with the line here, slightly rotating the shoulders and just working on what gives me the best stretch as I move down and up. And I'm working on 8 reps one side, then switching and doing 8 reps on the other side. And like I said, this is really just working on trying to improve hip external rotation. It's important to have that 90 degree bend in the front hip and front knee so that you get the best line of the stretch here. I'm supersetting that with a Tailor Pose. So I'm sitting on a yoga block here and placing the feet on the yoga block. This is primarily because I find that sitting on a soft surface allows me to go deeper. Sitting on the hard mats, I don't find that I go as deep in my hip abduction. So just being able to sit up on the yoga blocks makes a big difference. I'm starting with some overcoming isometrics. So I'm using these big yoga blocks and I'm just putting them on the outside of the thigh, and I'm actively trying to crush those yoga blocks. So it's not an end range sort of thing. I want to make sure that I can push into those yoga blocks. I'm not just touching them lightly. I'm abducting the hips and feeling a contraction in the glutes as I try to push down on those. I'm doing 3 times 10-second holds, and then I'm removing the yoga blocks and moving into some adductor flies. So placing the dumbbells on the inside of the knee and just trying to isolate the contraction of the adductors, feeling them shorten, and then actively trying to pull the knees down towards the ground by activating the glutes again. So 10 reps there, moving up and down. And then on the last rep, I'm just doing an isometric, an active isometric, trying to pull the knees towards the ground, sort of play with the pelvis position. I find a slight anterior pelvic tilt will help here, and just trying to strengthen and stretch the adductors. Again, it's 3 sets here. So 3 sets of the Pigeon Hip Hinge on each side and 3 sets of this Tailor Pose, combining overcoming isometrics, repetitions, and isometric holds. I now move into the second part of the flexibility components in this session. I'm doing a seated straddle leg lift, and I'm combining that with an actual pancake stretch. Now, seated straddle leg lifts or seated pike leg lifts are an end range of motion core compression exercise. If you don't have the flexibility to perform these, so if you have to lean the torso back to be able to lift your leg off the floor, then it's not an effective progression for you to be working on right now. You'd be better off focusing on standing variations or hanging variations of core compression work until you build enough strength to be able to sit on the floor comfortably, have an upright torso or a slightly forward leaning torso, and be able to do the leg lifts, okay? That's how I sort of scale this or progress my clients with this. We start with standing variations, hanging variations, and then we move to the floor once they have the flexibility to be able to do this. So when I sit on the floor, I'm sitting in my straddle. I'm using the yoga block to give me a slight anterior pelvic tilt. I like to do a little bit of stretching here on the leg that I'm about to train so that I can increase the posterior chain flexibility so I get better anterior chain contraction. It helps me to get the leg off the floor. And then contracting the quad nice and hard, keeping the knee straight, trying to draw the femur into the back of the hip capsule. So before we lift the leg up, we're actually trying to suck or pull the upper leg bone into the back of the hip capsule. This helps us get better activation of the hip flexors, so we shorten them before we use them to lift the leg off the floor. I lift the leg up, I pause for 2 seconds, then lower the leg and keep the femur pulled into the back of the socket as I work through those repetitions is what we're after. I like to place the hands flat on the ground and try to actively push into the floor so I keep the forward lean of the torso, but also if I'm pushing down, that's like doing a crunch. It's helping me activate the abdominals more and get better contraction in that core compression. So after I've done the seated leg lifts, I move into just a seated pancake. Again, I'm on the yoga block, but I'm just using it to tilt the pelvis forward. So as I tilt the pelvis forward, my hips are on the floor, and the yoga block's just giving me that little bit of assistance to move into the anterior pelvic tilt. I'm placing 15 kilos on my back right now, and I'm using that to assist me in the pancake. Without the weight, I wouldn't get as deep. If I go too heavy with the weight, the body's going to resist that weight and not move into a new range of motion. So it's about finding the Goldilocks of weights. What's the weight that's going to assist us, increase our range of motion inside the pancake, and allow us to go deeper? So I use every trick in the book here. When I'm leaning forward into the pancake, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to internally and externally rotate the hip. I'm trying to dorsiflex and plantarflex the toes. I'm trying to actively pull my heels into the ground, contract the hamstrings as if I'm doing a hamstring curl to try and pull myself deeper. I'm activating the glutes to try and pull the legs wider. So there's all these little things we can think about that might allow us to move into a deeper range. And right now, this is probably the best my pancake's ever been. I can definitely notice that I'm getting closer and closer to the floor. And I can tell, and I've said this in another video, that my hips are starting to get a better anterior tilt. So now I'm not feeling like I'm sitting on my hip bone. I'm definitely forward on the hip bone, and it's allowing me to apply more force into the stretch. My coach says to be careful here, not to apply too much force. It's sort of a slow progression, building the strength and flexibility step by step and trying to get to the floor. So I'm happy with how this is progressing at the moment. You'll notice that my back is slightly rounded, and the goal is obviously to flatten that out. But there's nothing wrong with doing rounded back hip hinging movements. I've actually written a blog post about that. I'll put a link in the bio today, all about can rounded back movements help improve our flexibility, and they certainly can. Massive fan of the Jefferson curl, massive fan of the rounded back pancake, which I talk about in the blog post. So if you're working towards your pancake and you're finding that you have limited flexibility, you might want to try some of this rounded back flexibility training as a progression to start working towards more of the flat back pancake stuff. So again, this is 3 rounds. I'm doing 3 rounds of the seated straddle leg lifts, 10 reps on each side, and then I'm doing 3 rounds of just hanging out in the pancake, trying to work my way deeper. 45 to 60 seconds I spend in that pancake position. Okay, that's my flexibility session done today. So now I'm going to move into the warm-up for my gymnastics strength training session. I've explained this warm-up before. It's the same as one of my other sessions during the week. So feel free to go and look at those video logs if you want me to explain what I'm doing in this warm-up. But here's just a collation of the videos I'm doing. It's just one set of each of these movements. You can see it's in this straddle position, so it's going to be helping with, let's say, straddle planche, let's say the hollow back press position, just building that strength in that posterior chain. Okay, now that I'm warm, I'm going to move into the main part of today's gymnastics strength training session. There are 3 components and they're in a tri-set, so like A1, A2, A3, and I'm just working through these for roughly 5 sets. So the first one is an eccentric hollow back press on the P-bars. I'm kicking up to handstand, holding the handstand, opening into like a straddle, and then lowering down through the handstand push-up and transitioning into like a bent arm straddle planche. This week it didn't go as well as last week. I put it down to a little bit tired, a little bit fatigued, maybe not fully recovered. So the eccentric handstand press-ups weren't as controlled as they have been in previous weeks, but we all have these training sessions. So I'm trying to do 3 reps here. So I'm kicking up, trying to catch the handstand and just work on controlling that handstand. The slower I move into it, the better. So sometimes if I rush it, that makes the eccentric a lot harder to control. So I need to think about leaning the shoulders forward and slowly starting the eccentric handstand push-up, feeling the tension, because that definitely gives me more control. I also think I need to build a little bit more strength in that bent arm straddle planche, because I can't hold that for very long when I get into that position. This is really heavy on anterior delts, and the shoulders need to be quite strong and stable to work this. If you rush this, I think you'll end up with a lot of anterior sort of shoulder pain here. So although this week wasn't as good as the previous weeks, I'm still happy with how the session went, or how this exercise went, and hopefully next week it'll feel a little bit better and I'll move back into getting some quality reps in. From here, I'm moving out to the rings and I'm working towards a back roll. So the progression I'm working on here is just sort of working on the kip, extending the hips, and not necessarily catching in the support, just actually coming back to standing on the floor. So this is quite a good progression. I quite like this progression. It's helping me explore that hip extension without having to worry about, the catch. So I find that setting the rings to a height where I can still pull up. So I'm holding a false grip. I'm doing a little bit of a pull up so I activate the muscles in my back and get my feet off the ground. And then I'm bringing the legs up and over and trying to kick out at maybe a 45-degree angle. So that force is helping me go up, but it's also helping me move back. So the shoulders are coming back in alignment. So when I get this right, I definitely feel that I'm generating enough force to get myself up into that ring support position or pretty close to it. And then just allowing myself to come back to the floor here. A little bit of rest between reps, giving myself some time to focus on what I need to think on here. There's a lot going on and it's a very fast and explosive movement, so you sort of got to have a wits about you. I'd like the rings to be a little bit higher, so this setup that I've got here on this pull-up bar is probably not the best for it. I notice that sometimes I don't point the toes. I think I'm just dorsiflexing the toes, making sure they're not going to hit the bar as I go through the movement. But yeah, it's something I need to play on, maybe consider building a taller pull-up bar that allows me to do some of this ring stuff or this high ring stuff. I'm looking forward to the next level of this. I think the next level in my next phase will be to actually catch the back roll. I feel that I'm getting closer to that, so it'll be good to explore that in the weeks ahead. The last movement that I'm working on in today's session is just the muscle up transition, but you'll notice that it's wide rings. I'm not pulling the rings to the sternum and having them in front of the chest. I'm keeping them wide here, and I'm just working on transitioning here. So the backwards and forward rolls and a lot of stuff on the gymnastics rings where we're transitioning from below the rings to above the rings, we need to have that muscle up strength, and we don't always want to do that with a narrow grip in the muscle up. With the back roll, my body has to be between the rings, so I can't bring those rings in close together. I have to keep them wide. So we need to condition the shoulders to be strong in that wide grip muscle up. So we're just working on that in terms of that transition. For a long time, I haven't been using tape. I've been trying to build the calluses on my wrists, and that really hasn't been working because you can only train to a certain point. And it's a hot, humid climate here, so when the wrists start to sweat, it tears the skin quite easily. So taping has made a big difference. So I always tape the wrists now before I do any of that false grip work, and it makes a big difference. It takes away some of the pain, gives you a little bit better grip, and I obviously can do more repetitions. I'm not tearing the skin and then stopping because I know that if I keep going, I'm just going to end up ripping the skin and bleeding everywhere, which is never a good thing. So that's my strength session. I'm happy with the reverse roll and how that's progressing. I'm happy with my strength in the muscle up transition. My handstand push up eccentrics there definitely need a bit of work. I am doing that 2 times a week now in the 2 sessions that I've got, handstand press up and this sort of eccentric hollow back press. I've been stronger in this before, but yeah, just a bit of time, bit of consistency with training, and hopefully that'll all come along. Anyway, that's my 4th and final session for the week. I've done a video for each session now. So next week I'll be talking about my progress and how it's all going as we go into week 5. Then we've got week 6 and then sort of coming to the end of the session. Christmas is around the corner, so I'll probably take a little bit of a break and publishing vlogs over Christmas. I will keep training, but then in the new year I hope to return and continue sort of sharing my thoughts about my own training, sharing that journey, and hopefully motivating more gymnastics skill seekers like yourself to continue with your training, giving you some ideas of new goals to work on and maybe some progressions that you can target. Also just a way for me to record my own training. I can look back on this, which is kind of cool, and see where I've come from, the stuff I've worked on, and how I've made progress over the weeks, months and years, hopefully for as long as possible. Anyway, happy training to you. If you've got any questions or comments about this session, feel free to leave them below in the YouTube video and I'll definitely get back to you. See you soon.